Hi guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today's video I'm so excited about and also a little shocked that we've already reached this point of the year, but nevertheless we are basically halfway through the year, which can only mean one thing. We gotta chat about all of the books I've read so far, the best books, the worst books. That's right friends, today we're gonna be doing a little bit of a mid-year book freakout. This is a video I look forward to doing every single year. It gets me really organized, not only to think about what I've read, but also what I want to read for the second half of this year. Per usual, I will have all of the questions linked down below, but without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right in. The first question is a doozy and also a good one to just get out of the way, and that is the best book you've read so far this year. And if I'm being honest, I feel like this year I have read a lot of really great books, some excellent books, a lot of okay books, nothing so terrible, but also nothing I'm so obsessed with. I can't wait to sing about it from the rooftops. That being said though, I definitely do have a few favorites I can't wait to chat about, and I think my favorite book I've read so far this year has to be The Trials of Empire by Richard Swan. This is the third and final book to the Empire of Wolf series, and I have to say overall I feel like the author did a fantastic job wrapping this entire trilogy up, and it's definitely currently one of my new favorite series that has been released. Third books within fantasy series tend to be my least favorite just because they have to focus so much on reconciliation and sort of wrapping things up that there's less space for like explosive plot movements, but I feel like Richard Swan did a great job sort of balancing all of these things within this final novel and conclusion. Also the characters, the writing style, so much about this series I truly adored. This is a series that's set in an empire, and the empire basically keeps law and order by having these individuals called justices roam the land. They are not only really powerful magic users, but they can also act as like judge and executioner for the law of the land. And in this story we're introduced to one of these justices named Sir Conrad von Volt, but the story is not told from his point of view, but instead his assistant. This series is told reflectively, so our main character is sort of recounting the events of this really tumultuous time in this empire, and every book truly escalates in directions I could not anticipate. I love the characters in this series. There's so much humor and banter, but it also has a very serious plot. There's also a lot of like philosophical questions at play within this book, and a lot of people who are interested in the sort of moral aspects of what they're doing in the society that they're trying to create. This combined with a healthy dose of like religious horror. I truly adore this series from beginning to end, and I just feel like it built itself up so well. So I think this third and final installment is my favorite book I've read so far this year. I was very satisfied reading this. Next up is the best sequel I've read so far this year, obviously removing The Trials of Empire, which is a book 3, and I think I'm gonna go with Nona the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. Beginning of this year, I reread and also caught up on the Locked Tomb series by this author, and honestly, I have been absolutely delighted. This is a super weird series. The setup, the structure, every book is also very unique in terms of its narrative style, the characters you're following, and just the overall tone of the story. So going into every installment in this series, you get something different, which I have found to be so refreshing. But there is a consistent through line, which is incredibly likable characters, a very strange and confusing plot that will keep you guessing till the end, and just honestly a style that I have come to really love with Tamsin Muir's writing. But Nona the Ninth is the third book within this sort of necromancer in space story. Lots of conspiracy, lots of action within the first two books. So it's quite the pivot starting Nona the Ninth, in which we're following our main character Nona, who loves everyone. It's very domestic, which again is quite the pivot within this series. We follow Nona in her daily life. She's going to school, she's making friends, she loves her parents, and obviously though while reading this you kind of get the sense that something much more complicated is happening behind the scenes, but we don't really know what's going on, and neither does Nona. Unpacking the mystery of this book and just enjoying the character interactions and the overall story was a delight. I just love how I never know what the heck is going on within these books until the very end, and even then I'm kind of like, where are we gonna go with this? And I just find that to be such a fun experience. I really enjoyed Tamsin Muir's writing. I can't wait for the fourth and final installment in this. Next up are some new releases that you haven't gotten to yet, but really, really want to. I have a few books here. The first is the Silver Blood Promise by James Logan. It's the first book to a new like epic fantasy series, and I'm very curious about. And in it we follow our main character who is a disgraced heir, card shark, and academy dropout, and after a duel goes wrong, he finds himself in sort of a complicated situation situation. At the beginning of this book, his father actually ends up being murdered, and he kind of goes on a quest to try to figure out what in the world is going on. I've heard really good things about this book from early reviews. It did just come out, but apparently it's full of action, humor, likable characters. Overall, it sounds promising from a book one point of view, but again, there's only one way to find out. The next book that is on my list is Mark Lawrence's The Book That Broke the World. This is book two, the first one being The Book That Wouldn't Burn, which is Mark Lawrence's new series that centers like an endless magical library. I personally adored book one. I loved the setting and the ambiance of the library. I loved our two main characters that rooted the book and story, kind of coming from different worlds and crashing into each other's lives. But I especially loved the sort of twisting plot line. It kind of gave you the sense of not really knowing who or what to trust. A lot of things happened in book one. The end especially was quite explosive, so I'm curious to see how the rest of the story is going to play out. This also just recently came out, and I need to get to it soon, and I definitely plan to do so. And then lastly, I have The Foxwife by Yang-Shi Chu. I love Yang-Shi Chu's writing so much. I've read her previous two releases. She combines like fantasy and historical influence perfectly in her historical fantasy books and settings. I just truly adore immensely. This book in particular sounds dark and mesmerizing, and I already know it's going to have Yang-Shi Chu's beautiful writing. This story centers the concept of fox spirits, and it basically opens with a young woman being found dead in a doorway, and the village thinks that a fox spirit had something to do with her passing. From there, we follow a detective who's trying to unpack this mystery. We also follow a family who has been cursed now for many generations, and that curse is their eldest son always dies. However, though, after a young woman moves in with them, this curse seems to be lifting, or is it, or something more complicated is happening behind the scenes. All of these characters' storylines, I believe, do begin to like intersect with one another, but all centers around the concept of fox spirits. Again, Yang-Shi Chu's ability to combine elements of history and religion and culture and fantasy in all of her books is truly one of my favorite things, so obviously I need to get to her new release soon as well. Next up, what are some of my most anticipated releases for the second half of this year? And boy, are there many of them. First and foremost, just to get it out of the way, we have to talk about Stormlight #5 by Braden Sanderson. We are getting a new Stormlight archive book this year, and I am jazzed. I have read and loved and reread the Stormlight archives now many times, so needless to say, I am pumped for this 5th installment. I'm going to be doing a reading vlog. I'm going to be reading this book right when it comes out. I'm not going to be sleeping until I finish this book, and I could not be more excited about it. And I know many of you guys are in the same boat as me. I also have to give a shout out to The Fury of the Gods by John Gwen, which is Bloodsworn #3. This is another series I have been really enjoying by John Gwen. This is kind of a Norse-inspired, very dark, very violent fantasy series following a variety of characters as they kind of set out on their own quests for power and destiny, and their lives sort of become intertwined. I really love the combination of these dark landscapes, really likable and complex characters, and the god aspect of it, and all of these things sort of getting very messy book over book. It also contains one of my favorite characters of all time, who is a mother on a quest for vengeance, and I'll tell you what, there's nothing like a mother character in fantasy books that I don't always love. It's one of my favorite things explored. And my last most anticipated release, though it was hard to narrow this down, has to be Lady Macbeth by Ava Reid, which comes out August 6th, and I will be reading this book right away. The cover of this book is a work of art. It's also just sort of a vibey, strange fantasy book, which I always eat up, and it's releasing at my personal start of fall, which is at the beginning of August. August 1st strikes, it is now mentally fall in my head, no matter what the weather is outside. And this is Ava Reid's interpretation and reimagining of the classic tale of Macbeth, centering Lady Macbeth and kind of giving her a new voice and agency within the story. I love Shakespearean retellings. I'm really looking forward to this. Next up is your biggest disappointment for the year so far, and I have 2 books to show off. The first one should be no surprise, and that is A Court of Silver Flames by SJM. I did not like this book at all. I went in with kind of middle expectations, not even high expectations, because one, I really liked Nesta as a character, and I was looking forward to sort of explore her emotional journey, and I previously really enjoyed Cassian and their sort of interactions in the past. I heard decent things about this book in terms of being entertaining, but for me, I didn't like it at all. While I liked the characters going into this, I found the romantic pacing and plotting to be repetitive and just like not really written in the style that I personally enjoy. There was no angst, there was no yearning, you know what I mean? It was just not for me, if I'm being honest. I did not like this book at all. And then I also have to quickly shout Golden Sun. I definitely found this to be an improvement to Red Rising, which I really did not like at all when I read it last year. This book was by no means bad, but I also just feel like people speak about Golden Sun like it's one of the greatest things ever written. So I went into it like expecting to have my mind blown, have this book be a 5 out of 5 star read for me, but it was more like a 3.5 star read for me. Again, objectively not bad, but I just had very high expectations and they weren't quite met. Next up is your biggest surprise of the year so far. And for me, this isn't a book, but more so like reading trends for the year. My mood this year has just been slightly different than years past. The first thing I noticed is how much sci-fi I've read. I've always enjoyed sci-fi. I've always read sci-fi throughout the year, but I think so far this year, I've read more sci-fi than fantasy, which has never happened to me before. And I definitely need to recalibrate a bit here. But yeah, I've just been really called to a few very popular sci-fi series that I've just been really into. I love a spaceship. I love a group of people on a spaceship. And yeah, I've been reading a lot of it. And Murderbot in particular has been a series I've just really enjoyed, and I've read a lot of those books. And then the other thing I would say is my contemporary romance side quest. I have read 6 contemporary romance books this year, which again is much more than I typically read. Because honestly, when I do read romance, it's either historical romance or kind of a cozy fantasy romance leaning book. But yeah, I've just been really reading and enjoying a lot of contemporary romance. It's been a lot of fun. I think I've been leaning into it especially because of summertime. And yeah, so I think my biggest surprise so far this year is just some of my genre preferences and choices and how much I've been reading in genres that aren't typically my main genre choice. Next up is new favorite author. Would either be a debut author or a new to you author. Transparently, I've actually haven't been reading a lot of new to me authors so far this year. I've read a couple, and 2 in particular I've really enjoyed, but in realizing this, I am definitely going to prioritize checking out some newer releases or debut authors in the second half of this year. But the first author I'm going to mention is Grace Draven. I read 3 of her books this year, and I have loved every single one of them. She writes the perfect type of romantasy book for me. I love her pacing. I love her characters. They're emotional and impactful, and the fantasy elements are well written. I truly love her storylines so much. So I will definitely be reading anything and everything this author puts out. And the other author I wanted to feature is Yumi Kitasai, who wrote The Deep Sky. She has another book coming out this year, which I'm definitely going to pick up. But I loved this sort of literary fiction sci-fi story. It was intense. It was interpersonal. I loved the character elements as well as the plot line, which absolutely kept me flipping the pages. It was just such a great combination of genres and things, and I was pulled in immediately, and I'm definitely a huge fan of this author as well. Next is newest Fictional Crush, and as someone who has read more romance this year than I have read in many years past, I think I actually have quite the selection to pick from. And I've decided to go with Miles from Funny Story by Emily Henry. I read a few Emily Henry books this year. I feel like Funny Story from a chemistry and just like meet cute point of view had to be one of my favorites. I loved the setup of this book. I loved the characters, and Miles in particular definitely sounded like quite the cutie if I'm being honest. But if you're not familiar, Funny Story basically introduces us to our main character Daphne. And Daphne has just recently moved to a small town in Michigan with her then fiance Peter. However, though, shortly before their wedding, Peter decides that he's actually in love with his childhood best friend and calls things off. Now Daphne finds herself stranded in this small town, and she's actually living with her ex's current girlfriend's ex, basically the guy she left to be with Peter, and they're now roommates, kind of like companions in their depression, but slowly they begin to get to know each other, fake dating, forced proximity. It's so much fun, and I love the chemistry between Daphne and Miles. It's just chef's kiss, and I loved Miles in this. It was spectacular. Next up is some favorite characters from books you read this year, and I have 2 series I've selected from this. The first is the husband and wife detective duo within The Hexologist by Josiah Bancroft. This series was a blast. It was full of all the whimsy and strangeness that you would expect from a Josiah Bancroft story, and it was anchored by one of my favorite husband and wife duos I have read in a while. I honestly could read like 100 books following them, just kind of solving mysteries, having fun interactions with one another, just the banter and humor and love and cleverness that exists between them and with them. I adored them immensely. But obviously, I have to give a special shout out to Murderbot. I have fallen in love with the Murderbot series this year. I read book 1 last year, but I've since read read many more of the installments this year, and I just truly have such a soft spot for Murderbot in my heart. I love Murderbot's journey. I love seeing it make friends begrudgingly. I love seeing it have to take on like unexpected missions. I just relate to Murderbot. Murderbot is hilarious and just honestly one of my current favorite protagonists that I have read in a long time. It anchors the story so well. The balance between like earnestness and humor that exists within this series is struck perfectly. Next up is a book that made you cry, and for this I'm going to go with Blood Over Brighthaven by Emma Wong. Emma Wong has done it again with her very intense, artfully crafted fantasy standalone with Blood Over Brighthaven. She has such a talent for impeccable characterization and world building, and the amount that she's able to pack in honestly not many pages is truly commendable. This book in particular is definitely one of the most intense books I have read in a while. Her unflinching approach to not only the message of this book, but also just the breakneck pacing that will not let you catch your breath is definitely a ride, to say the least. But in the story, we're following two main characters, and they live in what is this sort of utopian industrial society. Here, magic is sort of at the heart of this world, and all innovation and the society infrastructure is centered around it. At the beginning of this book, our two main characters have to unexpectedly begin working with one another, and mysteries and things begin to be revealed from there. Again, I cannot understate how intense this book is, but it's also incredible, and it made me cry. So there's that. To counteract that, next I have to talk about some books that made me happy, and for this I'm going to go with Abby Jimenez's Part of Your World series. This is a contemporary romance series comprised so far of 3 books. The first book is Part of Your World, then we have Yours Truly, and then lastly Just for the Summer. All of these books kind of are set in and around like the same location. The thing that's done in a lot of romance stories is you're following characters that are kind of connected to other characters, so you kind of have cameos of some of your favorite characters from previous books. Something that I particularly enjoy within this series by Abby Jimenez is the focus on like interpersonal issues and character growth, and like watching people fall in love and sort of overcoming like major obstacles in their life. I would say personally, I think Part of Your World is much weaker than the next 2 installment in this series, but overall I read all of these in basically a day. They're very entertaining. They're not like the greatest books ever written, but I had a lot of fun and they definitely made me happy. I was like smiling and kicking my feet while reading each one of these. So there's that. Next up is what are the most beautiful books that you've bought so far this year? And for this, I'm first going to go with Sunbringer by Hannah Kaner. This is a sequel to God Killer, which is another stunning cover. Everything about this book is truly so beautiful and definitely one of my favorite series from a pure aesthetic point of view. Luckily, the context of this series is also great, centering an unlikely group of individuals having to go on a quest with one another and rely on each other. I love it every single time. But yes, aesthetically though, beautiful. 10 out of 10. Alongside that, I also have to give a shout out to The Tainted Cup by Robert Jackson Bennett. A dust jacket-less beauty. I mean, look at this. And definitely matches the overall aesthetic to the story perfectly. Lucky for us, another fantastic book that I really enjoyed this year and gave 5 out of 5 stars. A Sherlock Holmes-esque fantasy story. We're set in a very strange fantasy world following 2 characters as they sort of take on an investigation full of strong personalities, humor, and like unlikely camaraderie, and obviously a conspiracy that really balloons on itself. I really enjoyed this from so many different angles and points of views, and I also especially loved this cover because it's beautiful. And then lastly, what are some books that I hope to read in the second half of 2024? I have honestly all series here that I hope to continue on with or complete before the end of this year. First and foremost, we have the Expanse series by James S.A. Corey. This is a series I've now been reading for many years, and honestly, I'm really enjoying it, but I also really want to wrap this up. I've read the 6th book this year. I've started the 7th book, if I'm being honest, and lucky for me, I always enjoy this series immensely when I read it. It's so plot forward. There's so many characters to read from, and I really enjoyed how the series has progressed book over book, and I've always been really impressed like how this series has been able to stay fresh and interesting despite like how long it is and all the different installments and directions we're going in. But with that in mind, this author duo has even come out with the first book to a new series, and I just want to read this, finish it, cross it off my list, and then I can check out a new sci-fi series down the line. Similarly, I want to get to Morning Star by Pierce Brown. I did not like Red Rising. I thought the second one, Golden Sun, was okay. So I'm hoping with the progression of this, I will think the third and final book is great. I'm also just curious kind of where I stand with this. And I know it's super popular, so I just kind of want to be part of the dialogue, part of the conversation. And it's been really fun to sort of share these reading vlogs with you guys and kind of see your thoughts and feelings too. So yeah, I want to finish this. this as well. I also want to read the entirety of the Binti series by Nona the Ninth. I love this author so much. I've read a lot of her books, and this is a collection of short stories that comprise up a series following our main character Binti as she's traveling to a faraway university in space, but then her spaceship is boarded by aliens and everything is sort of turned upside down from there. I already know this is going to be 10 out of 10, and I need some 10 out of 10 reads before I get to the end of this year, you know? Speaking of, I also want to get to Howling Dark by Christopher Ruccio. I read the first book, Empire of Silence, which is honestly, I feel like kind of the it book of right now. A sci-fi series that's definitely structured very similarly to a high fantasy series. I liked book one quite a bit. I didn't love it though. I felt like there was quite a bit of room for improvement, but everyone says that happens later on. So I'm curious to see how this plot is going to continue to expand. This is a long series with lots of pages, but you know what? I've got time. So let's read it and check it out. Speaking of a series I need some time with, I also want to get to book 2 and hopefully book 3 of the Likeness trilogy this year by James Islington, with the second Will of the Many book being pushed to 2025. You know, let's catch up on his backlog. Another example of me having read book 1 of this series and having enjoyed it but not necessarily loving it. It's Roman inspired, a huge cast, lots of likable characters. The plotting was fun and definitely very engaging, and I found the writing style to have improved throughout the book. So I'm really hoping that that improvement continues into book 2 and every installment just gets better and better, but there's only one way to find out. Alrighty guys, that is my mid-year book freakout tag. Please let me know down below some of your favorite and least favorite books so far this year, as I would love to know, and I will see you guys soon with another video soon. Goodbye!